just got a message from somebody who wanted to join, and apparently Zoom asked for code.
Yeah.
Try to enter.
Yeah, you can just copy and paste this to him, meeting ID and passcode 225070. It's on the chat. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back to our Conjunctures Zoom Talk series. We are very happy and honored to have Professor Klaus-Gerd Giesen from the Political Science Department of the Université Clermont, Auvergne. And he's going to give this talk from philosophy to ideology, transhumanism in the international political economy. Professor Klaus-Gerd Giesen is originally from Germany, and he's been professor at the Université Clermont Auvergne in Clermont-Ferrand, France. He's received his doctoral degree from the University of Geneva and has been assistant instructor at the Université de Genève, privat docent at the Université de Lausanne, adjunct professor and professor at the Université Catholique Louvain, as well as professor at the University of Leipzig, where he acted for some time as director of the Institute of Political Science. Professor Klaus-Gerd's publications are all available on the link to his website. And we are here particularly launching his latest publication, Ideologies in World Politics. Professor Klaus-Gerd Giesen, welcome, and you have the floor.
Muito obrigado, Nythamar. Hello to everybody. Nythamar, in your invitation, you mentioned the fact that my talk would be broadcasted to your Department of Philosophy, which now includes a program in international relations, which is political science. And I find this an awesome idea, actually, and quite avant-gardist. So I thought it may be appropriate to propose a topic which could be interesting to both, to philosophy and to political science as well, and especially the political study of international relations. So I will try to adopt a cross-disciplinary perspective, and that is, I wonder how a rather new branch in philosophy, in philosophical thought, quickly became, over the last 2 decades, a political ideology to justify a deep shift in the world's economy and in our future everyday life. So I'm talking about transhumanism, which I study now for about 20 years. And I published my first text on transhumanism in 2003, actually. And ever since, I constantly come back to transhumanism because of its rather astonishing evolution. So I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I hope I will be able to upload that. Just a second. Do you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, very good.
Okay. So the topic is From Philosophy to Ideology, Transhumanism in the International Political Economy. International political economy as a sub-branch of the political study of international relations. So what I want to do is I will try to tell you the political story or the history of transhumanism, a sort of narrative, by differentiating between different types of actors in the process of becoming the ideology of those people in the world system who are right now shaping our future way of life. And these are, first of all, academic philosophers, then what I call transhumanist ideologue, and third, powerful actors implementing transhumanism. In other words, I take here philosophy partly as an object of a perspective in international political economy, a sub-branch of political science. Okay, I start with transhumanism as philosophy. It didn't start exactly as a philosophical movement. The transhumanist movement passed through various stages after its first emerging in the early 1980s, mainly in science fiction literature and in science fiction movies, and then also in the arts. The adjective transhumanist was deployed as early as 1966 by the Iranian-American science fiction author Feridun Esfandiari. And when he met an artist named Nancy Clark, that prompted the first attempts to unify these ideas into a coherent whole. Esfandiari's renown had grown rapidly since he changed his legal name, becoming the enigmatic FM 2030, while Nancy Clark decided she would henceforth be known by Natasha Vita Moore, and that's a whole program actually, Need Vita Moore, and went on to publish in 1982 the Transhumanist Arts Statement. And then there were other people like the futurist Ray Kurzweil, etc., etc. Okay, from here, in less than 10 years, actually, the movement led to a clutch of academic philosophers. So this is the first type of actors in that evolution I tried to track back. Academic philosophers such as the well-known Swede Nick Bostrom, who is today philosophy professor at the University of Oxford, and also the US academic James Youth. So by the early 2000s, this movement had gathered sufficient critical mass in academia to be taken seriously in the debate. Now the question is, what is the core of transhumanist philosophy? Well, transhumanist philosophers normatively argue that we should aspire to transcend the human condition, working toward a genetically and neurologically modified post-human being. While this development would happen slowly, step by step, it is a proactive project and therefore contrary to the precautionary principle. Their vision calls for a leap into the unknown on the premise that human beings are encumbered by biological limits that prevent us from effectively taking on the challenges of an increasingly complex world to which we must adapt. The logical way forward would therefore be to expand our capabilities by integrating all sorts of emerging technologies, or even programming ourselves in such a way that we eventually become post-human. Very often, the objectives of transhumanist philosophers even take on a Gnostic quality that verges on the religious, insofar as numerous authors believe in the possibility of achieving one day immortality or even reanimating the dead with advanced technology after a spell in cryonic state. So what we are talking about is nothing less than the creation of a new humanity and therefore of an entirely new society. Just as past political projects, such as, say, communism or fascism, etc., aspired to do in other, ultimately less radical ways. Of course, this philosophical movement contains pronounced differences in terms of the technologies to be prioritized and the strategies to be pursued, particularly between, on the one hand, the so-called techno-progressives, such as James Youth, who take a more, say, egalitarian view on the path to the post-human condition, and on the other hand, extropians or so-called techno-libertarians who believe that refining and augmenting our capabilities through technology would be a matter of individual choice and financial means, even if that leads to actually acute inequality, or worse, to a technological caste system. However, these are merely internal struggles between different sensibilities. All fractions of transhumanism are in complete agreement on the basic tenets of transhumanism. The core can be broken down, the core of the transhumanist project can be broken down into three main premises, each of which has an eminently political tenet. So first of all, human beings in their, say, natural state are obsolete and ought to be enhanced by technology, which then becomes a means of artificially extending the hominization process. Thus, transhumanism sweeps human taxonomy into the political arena. Indeed, transhumanists believe we have actually a moral duty to replace the category of human with a new creature, a post-sapiens sapiens. We would potentially find ourselves in zoological terms at the moment of speciation, that is an extreme situation when a new species develops. Second, the goal is full hybridization between the post-human being and the machine, something that goes far beyond the human-machine interface we have today, like, for instance, now on Zoom between us and our computers. The mind-boggling image of a human-machine hybrid suggests a permanent integration. Transhumanist philosophers believe that human beings should become an intrinsic part of the machine, that we should be programmable or even reprogrammable like, say, software. This is the logical outcome of the post-war cybernetic movement's machinist fetishism of Norbert Wiener and a circle of philosophers around him. It proposes nothing less than the full submission to technical rationality, or human subjectivity being suppressed. From this point on, technology, viewed as the new agent of hominization, paradoxically becomes the main instrument of dehumanization. Transhumanist mechanism turns out to be fundamentally anti-humanist, not least because the machine is, by its very definition, inhuman. Third, this would have us transcend not only our humanity, but also what we might call the main basic philosophical matrix nowadays, and that is humanism, which brings together all our ways of understanding ourselves as human beings at the center of the world and at the top of the species pyramid. While humanists believe that individuals can achieve moral growth through education and culture, which is the humanization of the human, while transhumanist philosophy offers an altogether new set of values, insisting on the necessity of transitioning to a post-human species capable of continuous self-enhancement by integrating new technological components. In a sense, technology replaces here the need for moral, educational, or cultural effort. Now, the second part of my presentation is about transhumanism as ideology. Well, what is the ideology? Well, the concept was first introduced by the French philosopher, as you know, Antoine Louis-Claude Destutt de Tracy in his 1817 work, Éléments d'idéologie. Well, the concept of ideology is still today understood as a system, I quote him, of ideas by which men posit, explain, and justify ends and means of organized social action, unquote. This is despite the pronounced differences in how it has been conceptualized by, for example, Antonio Gramsci, Karl Mannheim, Louis Althusser, Nikos Poulantzas, Jürgen Habermas, etc., differences on which I cannot linger here. The emphasis is in all cases on how political ideology serves to justify the goals and strategies of political actions. That is, it's a way to theorize, to reduce complexity, but also to guide concrete political and economic action. As Antonio Gramsci puts it, ideologies organize the human masses. They establish the ground on which humans move, become conscious of their position, struggle, etc. Michael Frieden says, quote, ideologies compete over the control of political language as well as competing over plans for public policy. Indeed, their competition over plans for public policy is primarily conducted through their competition over the control of political language. In the 21st century, our century, transhumanism spread within 20 years to the debate in society on all future technological changes. It has now all the characteristics of a genuine political ideology and therefore can be a legitimate target for Ideologiekritik in German, ideological criticism, as one of the, I quote German author Jürgen Ritzert, legends which pose claims to authority by giving social domination the appearance of legitimacy, while playing an important role in the defense, stabilization, and improvement of all those advantages, which are ultimately hitched to the standing of ruling groups, unquote. From the three mentioned premises of general transhumanism and transhumanist academic philosophy, it splinters more and more into the vast diversity of discursive fields in society, each inspired by some new invention that will speed us on our way to the future. Thus, a strand of political activism was beginning rather early to make itself heard, initially through specialized journals like Extropy and the Journal of Transhumanism, a number of national and international associations, NGOs, which were then formed, including, for instance, the Extropy Institute, the World Transhumanist Association in 1998, which was rebranded in 2008 as Humanity Plus, Technoprog in France, Aleph in Sweden, etc., etc. This political activism was first organized entirely online through a multitude of discussion forums, email newsletters, and some conferences. However, the important role of transhumanist ideologues, as I call them, was much more important. That is, dissemination outside academia in a less complex way. Transhumanist philosophy in academia was rather still complex and critical and self-reflective. While here there's a shift by people such as Max More, who wrote the Transhumanist Declaration, Ray Kurzweil and Amon Twyman, they made an effort to, through conferences, through manifestos, through think tanks, and many other outreach mechanisms, to proceed to a vulgarization of transhumanist philosophy by Bostrom and others. So based on this considerable vulgarization effort, in recent years, transhumanism has become markedly politicized, invigorated by the arrival of the first political parties on a mission to influence decision-making and political agendas. For instance, in the United States of America, the Transhumanist Party fielded a candidate, Zoltan Istvan, in the presidential election in 2016 and ended the race on the fourth position. The United Kingdom has a party of the same name, while Germany has the Transhumane Partei. Next came private universities, entirely devoted to the transhumanist cause, such as Google's Singularity University, which was founded in California in 2008, or in Aix-en-Provence, and that would be of interest to Nythamar, the camp, which opened its door in late 2017s, and various other private institutes and foundations. And numerous NGOs and civil society groups also sprung up around the world around this corpus of vulgarization, actually. So ideology is exactly that. Now, much more important even is the use of transhumanist arguments by the new dominant actors in the world economy, which got their inspiration from the transhumanist philosophers in academia and from the transhumanist ideologues. The Silicon Valley elite, to a large extent, ascribes to and strongly promotes transhumanism. The same goes for the countless start-up entrepreneurs who gravitate around them. And they carry great weight in the societal debate by investing unprecedented sums of money, for instance, by Elon Musk, who is known, of course, for Tesla and for SpaceX, but who has also founded Neuralink, aiming to harness efforts towards the development of super intelligent cyborgs. Or Cyber Diamandis, who founded not just Space Adventures as a company, but also the Singularity University by Google. And what is the Singularity University? Well, it's an elite training for highly selected young people who should become in the future world leaders carrying out the transhumanist spirit. And the third one is Peter Thiel, another multi-billionaire who is known for owning Palantir and the hedge fund Clermont, but who also founded the Singularity Institute, which is different from the Singularity University, and among other things, created also the Seasteading Institute, which aims at constructing artificial islands in international ocean waters where people could live and where transhumanist experimentation, technological experimentations could take place. Not to mention the GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, all well aware that their commercial interests in the high-tech space are directly at stake. These tech giants have already poured staggering amounts of money into the next industrial revolution and are currently spending equally immense amounts on political lobbying and social engineering initiatives. One example of such social engineering effort is the partnership on AI, on artificial intelligence, which brings together virtually all of the big silicon people, with the exception of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who have launched their own similar consortium, OpenAI, with an initial investment of no less than $1 billion, with a stated aim. Both OpenAI and Partnership on AI have the aim of establishing some kind of self-regulation system for ethics in artificial intelligence, trying to avoid any state regulation. Now, the third part is transhumanism as the new world economy. Transhumanist discourse supports and justifies the development of countless high-tech objects and procedures, some already here, some merely imagined. Human genetic engineering, artificial worms, humanoid robots, biomechanical exoskeletons, advanced artificial intelligence, neurological brain chips, xenotransplant from human-animal chimeras, and so on. Most point in one direction and only in one direction, expanding human capabilities beyond its natural condition through nanoscale hybridization. The next great shift in our lives will likely come from the emerging NBIC technologies. Increasingly systematic collaboration, we have it separately, nanotech, the biotech, the infotech, and the cognitive sciences. But systematic collaboration at the nanoscale between nanotechnology, the N, biotechnology, the B, information technology, the I, and cognitive science, the C, will lead to the new great convergence. From here, we will see increasingly sophisticated and pervasive integration between the infinitely small, the manufactured life on an entirely artificial basis, intelligent machines, and the study of the human brain. Of course, the result will be a diminished humanity, perceived mechanistically as an object created through technologies of selection, elimination, and manipulation. On the grounds of improving the human being, the NBIC technologies actually result in the amputation of a number of dimensions to make it a one-dimensional being. The human being is here dislocated between different functions on which transhumanism hopes to be able to act separately. Memory, intelligence, endurance, empathy, moral sense, etc., etc. One problem is that such a reductionist approach takes absolutely no account of the overall balance, the need to respect proportions and the context. Another problem is, of course, that the very idea of high-tech enhancement of the human body itself, which is dramatically different from repairing the body in medicine, of course, will lead to a technological race towards the reduction of the human in favor of boosting the potential market for these hybrid technologies is immensely vast. And so human life will likely become further commodified. We will witness the arrival of what Céline Lafontaine in France calls, in French, corps marché, le corps marché, the body as market, or the body as capital, maybe. This is what the next industrial revolution has in store. NBIC technologies will undoubtedly mark a turning point in the evolution of capitalism, just like the steam engine for the first industrial revolution, electricity in the second industrial revolution, and electronics and computing in the third industrial revolution. An endless stream of new products and procedures will be launched on the market. The transhumanist discourse explains this explosion in supply of products by arguing that every new tool meets a specific need and fulfills a specific demand. In other words, transhumanism is an ideology that is used to justify this expansion into new markets. If transhumanists have their way, state regulations and mediation mechanisms will be pitched into an intractable struggle to contend with the new constituent inequalities. For example, between, on the one hand, the humans still in their, say, natural state, or what Kevin Warwick called the chimpanzees of the future, and on the other hand, a new technologically enhanced post-human species. Thus, the transhumanist ideology presents also an immense challenge to the Western welfare state as a deeply meritocratic system designed to compensate as much as possible for social inequalities. Furthermore, as the distinction between man and machine becomes less meaningful, there will be scope for new relations of production and new capital-labor relations. Workers could eventually become fully integrated into productive systems, for example, through chips implanted under the skin or directly into the nervous system, allowing for closer surveillance. Their productivity, vital for keeping ahead of the competition, could be boosted. If transhumanist ideology prevails, even to a limited extent, then there's no doubt that work will be dehumanized further still. So all of the warning signs are there. Over the course of several decades, we risk a gradual slide toward a post-human capitalism that will be profoundly disruptive, not only for individuals' relationships to other people, to work, and to the state, but for humanity itself. As the French philosopher Jean-Yves Goffy puts it, quote, regardless of their position on the classic political chessboard, they are the true revolutionaries, unlike the most radical politicians who simply want to modernize the systems of parenthood, family, school, money, work, dominant positions, governments, nations, unquote. So some conclusions, rather quickly, because my time is over, I guess. Well, this is not an equal political struggle. The societal debate has barely begun and the odds are stacked. Transhumanist ideology is driven by mighty multinational corporations that have the most to gain from seeing the NBIC convergence revolution unfold without a hitch. In this respect, transhumanism is already a dominant ideology, as it inspires the big players in the world economy and is able to crush all other ideological positions regarding technological change, particularly those of humanists of all stripes, as well as subscribers, for instance, to deep ecology. Under the sheer weight of money, these are billionaires in many cases. Transhumanism has now reached the stage where it has become a major political project involving mass ideological dissemination. It is no longer a marginal interest confined to academic debates in philosophy over ethics and legal issues. That was 20 years ago. Given how, say, solutionists skillfully splinter the societal debate into many small fragments, there's a solution to each technical issue, making it harder to see the overall picture and the combined resources of science and multinational corporations, particularly American, but increasingly Chinese as well. Well, there is every reason to fear that the world will step into the next industrial revolution without too much debate over what is waiting in the wings, the global political project that is transhumanism. The transhumanist ideological project is the perfect expression for an old anti-humanist ambition torn apart by the Austrian, philosopher Günther Anders in his day to bring about the obsolescence of man. Well, thank you very much. Muito obrigado for your attention.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor, for this brilliant talk. I immediately will open the floor for question. We already have Professor Nythamar question here. Should I read, Professor, for you?
Yes, you can read it, please.
Okay. So the first question from Professor Nythamar is, you have shown that transhumanism has now reached the stage of a major political project and massive ideological diffusion at the world level, which no longer remains confined to ethical and legal debates in academia. Now, do you think that there will be a new high-tech Cold War involving large multinational firms from major geopolitical players? Or there is also a possibility of improving international cooperation towards technologically enhanced posthuman being fully integrated into machine?
Well, thank you very much. That's a highly relevant, interesting question. The point is we have here a elite, economic elite and technological elite, which acts transnationally on the world scale, right? While the possibility of regulating technology is mainly based on national territories. So of course there can be one country or the other being able to regulate more or less all these new NBIC technologies and its convergence. But there will first of all, there will always be a few states where the regulation will not take place. That's the first thing. And second, as you know, they anticipated already the whole thing, especially Peter Thiel, who's actually not that well known, but he's extremely powerful in the United States of America, who created the Seasteading Institute. The Seasteading Institute is the institute which will finance, and they had already a project near French Polynesia in the Pacific Ocean, actually, to build an artificial island, which would be large enough for people to live there permanently, so to not to pay any taxes in any given state. That's so for the super rich. But secondly, also that new experimentations, which would be prohibited in any state in the world, could be done on such an artificial island. And actually, you know, in many of these in these fields, such as biology and bioinformatics, you don't need a lot of space. Actually, a small laboratory is enough. To answer the question is, well, high-tech Cold War, well, but among the big tech companies, there may be competition. There's, for the time being, not so much. For the time being, they are rather acting together, because what they need much more is to overcome possible resistances by civil society, by the states, and actually to try to get around these possible resistances. So they have a common interest. We should not forget about that, right? And then one single actor, say that Elon Musk, who is a really convinced transhumanist. If you read, you know, he has on his website a list of recommended readings, 10 books, and 1 or 2 are transhumanists. It's Bostrom. One of his recommendations is a book by Nick Bostrom. And in all his interviews, it's very clear that he's a convinced transhumanist and going to outer space like others in order to bring our civilization there. So we have a totally artificial life on Mars, etc., etc. But the main point is, he alone, his wealth is now something like $69 billion, which is 69,000 million. So he alone can finance, you know, all kinds of social engineering procedures. For instance, in artificial intelligence, he and Peter Thiel, he just gave $1 billion. They co-opted a lot of academics, actually, who are willing to play the game. And this is all to say, well, we can self-regulate our activities in NBIC technologies. So we don't need the state. These are neoliberals plus transhumanists, right? Cooperation, yeah, sure, there can be cooperation among states, but I doubt, you know, that all the states will join. Then they can just move elsewhere. They can move to another state to do the experimentations. And there will be a lot of pressure on everybody to just to follow, right? So I'm rather pessimistic, I must say, in this respect.
Thank you so much. Another question here on the chat. Since the transhumanist ideology, as you have convictly shown, is strongly driven by fractions of state apparatus and even more by those very powerful multinational companies that have the greatest interest in ensuring that the NBIC converse resolution runs smoothly, how do you foresee any role to be played by emerging democracies and peripheral countries?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, there are 2 questions. One, I believe it's a highly important question. Well, you have indeed some fractions of state apparatus, for instance, in China. I focus a lot on the US because the literature is available. But you know, in China, you have the equivalent of the GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, the BATX, which is the equivalent. Now, I'm not too much into that because I don't read Chinese, first of all, and because there's not so much information available. But here it's clear, in China, there's a large fraction of the state apparatus of the ruling party, which is also involved in the transhumanist ideology. Now, this is the first thing. So there are multinational companies, the BATX, which is Tencent and Alibaba, etc. So these are also multinational companies, of course, and they're in struggle with the American, in a competition with American multinational companies and backed by the state, which is also the case in the US. We should not forget that. I mean, some of these big players, Mr. Elon Musk could not launch his rockets. SpaceX rockets into outer space if he hadn't the contract by NASA. So NASA subcontracting, actually subsidizing his company. So indeed there is an articulation between these multinational companies and state apparatus. Now, how could in the periphery, in the world periphery, That's an excellent question. How can they try to regulate that? The point is, for the time being, this is a first world phenomenon, right? That is even Europe is not really in the battle. It's between China and the United States of America and some, so the main thing is, for instance, for the time being, it's a political battle over there, and all other states are caught in between. And it will spread step by step to the semi-periphery, so emerging countries, then to the periphery, which is not yet concerned by it because it's not there's no market there. You should not forget this is all about making money. It's about profit, right? It's about capitalism. So the periphery, for the time being, is not really conscious, I believe, about what is at stake. That's one important thing. And it will be left aside for quite some time. I don't know. I don't have the answer what they could do actually in order to prevent a spread towards these countries. Emerging countries such as, say, Brazil or India. Well, they could do something if their governments would agree and their parliaments would agree to oppose, which I think is not yet the case in Brazil, right? Not in these years. But.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to ask Antonio to open the mic and make his question.
Okay. Thank you for your talk. I'd like to know if you could summarize the argument that for even if we think that the convergence between those four technologies is successful, what is the argument that it will lead to something beyond human capabilities? Because in a sense, human body already makes this convergence. So why would an artificial convergence would produce something more powerful or more than what nature has produced? What is the argument for this idea?
Yeah, well, the argument is actually that the stated purpose actually of the NBIC convergence is to that's the goal. The goal is to go beyond the human condition, so to speak. Now, I am not in this field, of course. I'm not a specialist of law. I'm not able to say if that is really possible, but it seems, that they already tried. Kevin Warwick, whom I mentioned before, he implemented already a chip in his arm, and the same for his wife. And he was in the UK, and she was in the United States of America. And through their neurological system, they were able to communicate through the internet. So this goes beyond, apparently, beyond the human condition. So I guess there will be many applications which we do not even foresee right now, which could go in that direction. I'm not sure which ones. I don't know exactly. But that's the whole enterprise actually, is to say, well, we can have a new world by enhancing our condition, which is exactly the opposite of what is medicine doing. Medicine is just repairing, it's healing people. That's what is stated in the Hippocratic Oath, actually. It's to say, well, we have to heal people or to alleviate suffering without, that's the original version of the oath, without actually over-treatment, without doing over-treatment. That has disappeared in the Declaration of Geneva in 2017, strangely enough, which is the new oath by the physicians. So I wonder what happened there. I'm not involved in that field. So well, it's a normative thing. So they aim at enhancing the human being. I guess there are ways to enhance it through the NBIC convergence revolution, right? But it will be trial and error. So some will work, some others will not work. the whole thing is that for each case, they will try to find a justification, right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I would also like to have a question. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you see the inequalities in the human condition after of this fourth industrial revolution of this post-human capitalism. I was wondering if it's already clear that not all we have already some international actors playing in this war, being more in front of this new technology and debates in the world. Could we call some a new kind of imperialism after this, and how this new kind of dynamics could shift the international relations research, and how would affect the inequalities in the world? How this could change the human condition overall, or is a shift, but we will continue seeing the kind of dynamics that we see today, because we still have this very different inequalities between countries. But I was wondering if you change the nationalist narrative, how this could look.
Well, if the question is about inequalities between countries, between states, well, then it will, of course, the whole thing will lead to a further deepening of inequality in the world system, because right now it's Silicon Valley plus China. China is catching up, and it's very quickly, by the way. And so there will be competition between these then new superpowers, because if I take one example. If you apply a few of these NBIC convergence technologies to, say, soldiers, no, they will be much more capable to fight in any combat. They will not be as tired. They maybe not need sleep, who knows, or less sleep. The endurance would be higher. So this will have repercussions, considerable repercussions on the battlefield, right? The same for economic competitiveness. The worker, which integrates in his body or her body some of these new devices, will boost the productivity. So it will lead to further inequality between states, and it could lead to further imperialism if we understand by imperialism, like the dependencia theory, or the way actually power relations are distributed in the world system. That is that you can force people, you can force governments to behave the way you want them to behave. If that is the core of imperialism, yes, it could definitely, I believe. Yeah.
Just to continue a little bit the question, but we will still will be talking in a Westphalian sense of the international system, right? Because we're still talking about China. Do you think that we will start to talk about Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and other institutions maybe? Because, for example, in war, we have now independence, mercenary again, independence companies. They are hired by state, but they are not in the same nationalist sense that an army has. So it's already shifting a little bit. I was wondering if this post-humanist capitalism will change how we'll see these actors. If you still were talking about China and United States, or if we start changing for companies, I don't know, another kind of relations.
Yeah, well, the Westphalian state system since the 17th century, I think, is not dead yet, because these people, the transhumanist capitalists, they need the state as well. I should not forget. I mean, they try to escape the state for, to avoid to pay taxes, and maybe to do some experimentations which are too strongly regulated. I mean, there were already attempts to in this field, but at the same time, they need also the investment by the state. The state gives the infrastructure. You can privatize all kinds of things, but as, for instance, Immanuel Wallerstein or other people said very clearly, these people also need the state, and they need protection. For instance, intellectual property rights. You need a patent, in order to protect your invention in NBIC and many things like that. So I don't see the Westphalian state disappearing soon, not even under the new conditions of the fourth industrial revolution. There may be a transnationalization, but it's not incompatible actually with a stronger Westphalian state. You can have both increasing at the same time. Why not? You can have more transnational flows, more transnational investments, more transnational experimentations in technology, etc. But you can also then have stronger state apparatus. And the tendency, I mean, you live in Brazil, the tendency goes towards more nationalistic policy and more protectionism, and which is not incompatible actually. It's not. Both can be enforced similarly and at the same moment, I believe. I don't think we should argue, one way or the other. It can be both ways. In IR, at least that's what I'm teaching in international relations.
Thank you so much, Professor. We have another question here on chat. How do you think that ethics could be effective in terms of normative global regulations, assuming all the inequalities and competing interests among countries today?
Yeah, well, that's the other issue. I mean, can we, at a global level, do we have sufficient institutions to enforce a worldwide regulation of NBIC conversions? And I don't believe so. We don't have them yet. We have the United Nations, we have all kinds of international institutions, but we should not forget that their power is very limited, and actually, in many cases, member states don't even ratify when there's an agreement. We see this in ecology and environmental issues. All kinds of countries are actually not ratifying, or they're dropping out, like we see it right now in Glasgow at the COP26. And so some countries are just not playing the game. And so that's the fundamental contradiction. There are very few really global normative regulations in any given field, even in human rights, of course. And I see that right now we are more and more going into a crisis of multilateralism. In trade policy, we see it. In environmental policy, we see it. There's a deep crisis of multilateralism. So actually, there's a path toward less agreements, less regulation, normative regulation on the world scale, and we are more going to protectionism. That's the whole thing. So each state pursuing its own interests. So the transhumanist state can play one state against another. That's easy. It's very easy. But when you have a lot of financial needs, right? And you can co-opt people. So I'm rather pessimistic of the possibility of normative global regulation by international institutions or some sort of multilateral treaty or whatever.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think we don't have any more questions here on the chat. If someone would like to make another one, I think we still have some minutes. But I would like Professor Nythamar.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Klaus, for this beautiful talk and instigating discussion. Because you also did work on bioethics and neuroethics relating to global justice and international relations, I was wondering how you'd see this interesting way of relating these very innovative new technologies into bioethical concerns. For instance, thinking of this global pandemic, many corporations, precisely relating to what in the US they call the big pharma, right? the big pharmaceutical multinationals that have come under attack precisely because a lot of people were, for instance, in the US, they are questioning the necessity of a fourth shot, a fourth jab of anti-COVID vaccine, when many Americans barely took the first shot, but some people already going forth a fourth shot of the anti-COVID vaccine. So some people think that at this very moment, bioethics have to take a stand in terms of fighting pharmaceutical multinational interests. So I was wondering if, by way of analogy, you'd see that there is also, even though, as you just said, you've been rather skeptical and pessimistic about any global normative regulations, do you see any role to be played by these very institutes or organisms you mentioned, like UNESCO? I know that UNESCO is really trying to promote, some kind of fair equality of opportunities for countries who do not have access to these biotechnologies. And they did this through the World Health Organization for the vaccine, right? But now, when you see that UNESCO is also promoting UNESCO chairs in artificial intelligence ethics, and it seems that they are trying to come up with the same kind of a moral reasoning. So do you think this is going to be like some kind of ideological battle in terms of whether it's worth pursuing any kind of ethical concern in terms of these new technologies? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nythamar, for that question. Actually, this is, again, two questions in one, I guess. That's on the one hand, we have actually this fragmentation in ethics, in academia. I'm not just talking about academic debate in ethics. We have neuroethics, which you are doing in Porto Alegre, I believe. We have bioethics. We have all kinds. So there's a fragmentation, first of all, which is already the problem. So that is, we can hardly follow all these new strands of NBIC technology. It's just popping up. All kinds, for instance, there's now this artificial life issue, where actually they don't take the basic stones of life, the DNA. They make it from artificial things, right? So this will bring up artificial life. So there will be a branch in ethics which we will call the ethics of artificial life, right? Okay, then we have bioethics, and then we have that is subdivided into ethics of genetics and ethics of this and that, etc., etc. Well, who has the complete overview? So we become all specialists. We have to become all specialists, and that's actually a political problem already, because then one is doing neuroethics, the other one is doing ethics in genetic engineering and things like that, and there's not the overall picture is lost. So we have already a problem in academia. We cannot read everything. It's not possible anymore. There's too much literature even now in ethics, right? So it's fragmented. That's what I mentioned before. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, in academia we are very much privileged, like in this virtual class. So we have, while we are devoted to truth, we try to get as close as possible to some statement which we believe is, for the moment, being the truth. But when you mention UNESCO and the World Health Organization, well, it's a different story. Then the politics comes and the interests come into the picture, right? And so look, I did a study on UNESCO, how UNESCO institutionalized bioethical committees, right? And it was a watering down. They first invited all kinds of people to be member of it, but each of them that was in the 90s. each of them had to make a statement about genetics, right? And so they took only a few of them, and so there was a selection process, and it was very interesting to see who would be selected, which expert was selected. That's a political issue. And then, well, look at the WHO, the World Health Organization, right now in the pandemic. I mean, about China, China and its interests in the World Health Organization. Well, that's something. It's about power relations. Now, this is not politically neutral, right? And they can make their way in one way or the other. And then you have now all these third thing, you have all these alternative ways of thinking ethics, which is done in the Partnership on Artificial Intelligence by Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, or others. And they have more means than the UNESCO and the World Health Organization altogether. They have many more, much more money. They have it's very complex institutional framework. They're producing reports. The dissemination is fantastic. Everybody reads these reports. Who reads reports by UNESCO? I mean, a few specialists, and that's it. So this is, well, I like to be in academia, but I see that we have limits, right? we can discuss things, and we can try to conscientize, to make people conscious about some issues, right? But we are not anymore the only people having an influence in the public debate. We are among them for sure. Fortunately, we are still among them. But they are nowadays, for let's say last 30, 40 years, even before transhumanism, they are more and more experts of all kinds, and their job is to be an expert, right? And it's not necessarily expertise which comes from academia. And so I don't have the final answer to your question, Nythamar, but here again I'm a bit pessimistic, because the politics, I'm working in philosophy and in political science, and I see, so sometimes in philosophy it's a bit too idealistic. Well, because many philosophers, by far not all, but many, forget about the power relations. While in political science, there's a lack of conceptualization and about rigorous reasoning, etc., etc. So the issues are not always clearly stated. And, but in institutions, again, I don't see any normative global regulation by the UNESCO or the World Health Organization or whatever. And even the ethics of artificial life. Okay, UNESCO can maybe be active in that. I don't think that. Yeah, the World Health Organization is about health. So how do you find health? And it's very interesting to see that the definition of health by the World Health Organization changed over the last decades. Very interesting, like this Hippocratic oath, which was totally modified all of a sudden. So it's what I quoted before Richard, who said, "Well, it's all about political language." That's where the power is. Sorry that I'm not able to give you a better reply, a better answer.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this instigating talk and for accepting our invitation. We are reaching our time. I will pass the word for Professor Nythamar to end our discussion today. But I would like to thank you again for this amazing debate. It was very instigating and very interesting, since we don't talk so much about post-humanism here in Brazil. We're still starting our discussion in some ways.
That's right. Thank you so much, Professor Giesen. Yeah, Professor Klaus-Gerd Giesen has been to Brazil a few times, and we are really looking forward to your next visit to Brazil, and we'll make sure that you come back to Porto Alegre, and we'll honor us again with your thoughtful, insightful talks about global politics, international relations, and especially now post-humanism, as Camila just said. This is a very important topic nowadays, and it's only beginning to be debated down here in Brazil. So Klaus, thanks once again. We hope to see you soon, and have a nice weekend. We all take care, stay healthy.
Obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you
Ciao,
very much.
ciao. Bye bye. Salut.